Conversations, episode Priest Holmes. I am your host, K. Bex, and whether you are a first-time listener joining us or a long-time listener coming back to the podcast, welcome in and very happy to have you here. Hopefully, we will have you for future episodes as well. If you're one of those first-time listeners or you're a long-timer who has not done so yet, please follow us, like us, subscribe to us on all the major socials that we're on, as well as your listening platform of choice. We're on Facebook, X, at KBEX_ATC, Instagram at cornversationspod. And if you are a subscriber to Apple Podcasts or you listen to us that way, in particular, ratings and reviews on that platform are very helpful to let Apple know that this is an active podcast that people are listening to. But we appreciate your comments or interactions on any of those platforms either way. And lastly, if you'd like to get in contact with us in a more private way or send us a mailbag question, conversationspod@gmail.com is the way to do so. That is one of the best ways for us to interact with people that are not already on the show. It's been about a week since the last podcast episode, so there's been a lot that has been going on. We're going to touch on a number of different topics, hopefully in a time frame that'll keep you guys engaged. We'll start with a roundtable discussion about the NFL schedule release that came out several days ago. So we'll take a look at some of the teams and their schedules, as well as a strength of schedule metric that I think is pretty interesting. We'll then dive into a topic that seems to come up on an annual basis now, and that is, where will LeBron be playing basketball next season, if he plays at all? So we'll dive into that question, which has been picking up some steam here relatively recently with the Lakers being out of the playoffs. And then we will dive into a topic about something that seems to be a regular occurrence here on Conversations, and that's uniform jerseys related. So we'll talk about a high-profile college football team that announced several jersey changes for this upcoming football season, and we'll get the opinions on those. But before we do so, I want to introduce the guests for this podcast episode. My buddy who was my roommate in college over a decade ago now, and I mention that because at the time we made jokes about being on the air someday together, and it feels like it's been a long time coming that I was going to have him on the podcast. So without further ado, I want to finally bring him on the show and welcome him. Zach, how you doing, buddy? How are things going?
Good. Glad to finally be on. Thank you for having me, of course. Like you said, it's probably been a long time coming, but prefer you not to say how long ago it's been since I've been in college. So just remember that going forward.
I will try not to do that. I was going to do that, but because you told me not to, I'll do my best not to mention the length of time that it's been.
It's been longer than I'd like to admit, but you've already pointed it out. So
yeah, and I'll try also not to get super weird for the listeners out there and use my on-air voice that we used to practice back in the day.
I prefer that one, but if it's for the pod, I'll do whatever it takes.
Well, K-Bex and Z-Man in the morning, OHIO coming at you.
It was always more like Morning Zoo, like Bob and Tom, than it was ever sports related.
Yeah, well, that's if we actually decided to go down that path. But I feel like the more pronounced pronunciation of some of those things is the way it probably would have sounded. Yeah. Anyway, let's dive into NFL schedule release. I know that this is something that a lot of people, whether you're 24/7 NFL or you're just somebody who's looking forward to the next season, has their eye on as we get into the month of May. And the NFL's done a really good job of allowing teams to have a little bit of fun with this. So schedule releases aren't just a PR move. It's also an opportunity for the socials channels for the NFL teams to put on their best show. So we'll start there. As far as NFL schedule releases are concerned, are you somebody who enjoys the release videos that a lot of these teams do now to introduce the 2026 season in this case, but they've been doing it now for a few years. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I do like them. I think the Chargers seem to kind of take home the prize every year, and they must have, either the same or similar people working on their social media side that are putting these videos together this year. Seems like a consensus that they did a fantastic job with theirs again this year. But I think it was Halo themed, so I guess if you didn't play Halo, you don't really care about it or think it's cool or fun. But it hits home with a particular set of millennials, along with a lot of the others that I noticed this season too, or not season, off season. So the strength of schedule bit of it, how good can we tell anyone's going to be this far out? I know we've gotten through the draft and free agency and all that stuff, so we've gotten a little bit, at least an idea of like some teams that have improved and maybe some that have stood pat. But the strength of schedule part of it, I'm always like, the Browns are going to be bad, and the rest we never really know. So until the season starts. So I think the strength of schedule rankings is always kind of funny, but I do enjoy the release videos only because it's like a little, we're in the middle of baseball season started, middle of NHL, NBA playoffs, and then they have this, in the middle of May, like, oh yeah, remember the NFL? We're still around. It's kind of how they're always like, they don't want us to forget that they exist.
Oh, they do not. And I don't blame them for that. They also do a pretty good job of trying to make sure that they are constantly on the tip of people's tongue. But in terms of the strength of schedule topic, you brought it up, you teased it. Let's rewind that a little bit, because I did want to focus on talking about the schedule releases, combining it with a graphic that I saw. It made its way all the way to Fox Sports related to strength of schedule. And just for the listeners, the way that they set this up or structured this graphic, which ranked every team from 1 to 32 on a strength of schedule, it was based on their opponent win percentage from the previous season. So basically what they're doing is they're saying what teams are on your schedule for the upcoming season and what was the collective record of those teams in the previous season. And they established a winning percentage and basically ranked it 1 to 32 on that basis. And you came up with some interesting groupings, if you will, the rankings 1 to 32. We'll get into some of the teams. We will talk about the most difficult strength of schedule. We'll also talk about the least difficult strength of schedule, and it is interesting who those teams are. And if you're a listener who hadn't seen this graphic yet, we'll share that with you. But I do want to make a comment about strength of schedule. I think it sounded like your opinion of this is, well, there's a lot that can happen from season to season, and there's difficulty in using strength of schedule as any meaningful barometer for what's going to happen moving forward. But I want to bring up that in terms of external factors, things you can't control that I do think have an impact on how a team is going to do, schedule and injuries are the two things that I would say are the keys in terms of things you can't control, but that do have an impact. And so while this might be a crude way of assigning a strength of schedule because it's based on last season's results, I do think that schedule has a lot to do with whether or not a team is able to make their way into a playoff position if they weren't expected to, or in the case of a team that is expected to do good things, if they have a down year. I think you can kind of look back at what happened to them and you can say, well, if it's not injuries, maybe it was schedule.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not so much, I guess. I just think the assigning of the strength of schedule is kind of funny. Like, you can do that for college; it's a little different. I just think it's you're right. Like, obviously, that is out of your control. Who you play is who you play. I just, to look on there and, like, last year people would have said Carolina would have been an easy W, and they made the playoffs. So I think that's kind of my thinking there, is like, you really have no idea how good some of these teams are going to be for the most part. But I think your point is obviously that they, although it's predetermined, what your schedule is going to be, it could end up shaking out that you're playing 4, or 3 AFC North teams on your schedule in the middle of late November, early December, and you're not used to playing in that kind of weather or what have you. It could definitely have an effect on your team. So I definitely I agree with you there, at least.
Yeah, so because we seemed to be at odds a little bit, but then kind of came back around, I figured it would be good to start with a heavy hitter here. So let's talk about several of these teams that have had their schedules released now, and they are on this ranking list. And we'll let, again, the listeners know where they're on the ranking list. And then another thing I'm going to do is bring up which division they have to play, which is something that every team gets. You get a team from your other conference, one division, you play all three of those teams. So I think those are two pieces of information that are key to these discussions. But the first team I want to start out with is the number one team on this strength of schedule rankings that were released last week, and that's the Chicago Bears. And I think that that's pretty interesting because the Bears, they're always, right? They're always a team that seems to incite a lot of opinions from people. And now that there's been some success in Chicago recently, and Ben Johnson does seem to be the right choice as head coach there, that there's even more expectations going into the season, given what they were able to do last year and kind of the way that the offense developed under Johnson. So let's talk about this because now that they have the most difficult strength of schedule according to the crude rankings that have been established here. And they are facing the AFC East, which includes Buffalo, New England, of course, the Super Bowl runner up from last season, and then Miami, which might be the most easily winnable game of that list. What are your thoughts there? I mean, do you think Chicago now is a team that if you had high expectations for them before the schedule was released, that you're thinking differently about it? Or is this a situation where Chicago is well set up to overcome maybe a more difficult schedule than some other teams in the league?
Yeah, I mean, look, they had a really great success last year compared to a lot of their other years, and like you said, gave Bears fans lots of hope. Constantly in the news, that is one of the franchises that people pay attention to the most. But they lost, traded DJ Moore, lost their starting center, and they've added some good pieces there. Kobe Bryant from the Seahawks, and I had a solid draft according to people, but again, that is to my argument, no one knows how good a draft is going to be until it's a few years down the road, just like you don't know how good the teams are going to be playing until the season starts. But, looking at that list, like you said, Miami, probably the worst out of the AFC East that they're going to have to face. You've got Buffalo there. No joke. It's also in December at Buffalo. That's no easy feat for any team. Don't care who you are. Even if you are the Bears used to playing in cold weather, it's going to be a challenge, no doubt. And Buffalo, interesting to see how they're going to end up this year. Been knocking on the door for a long time of being Super Bowl contenders and possibly getting there, but just haven't gotten over the hump. But the remainder of their schedule, a lot of playoff teams. You've got the Eagles, Carolina, of course, and based off of last year's schedule, yes, I would say that this would be a very tough one. Not a lot of weak spots in there besides maybe the Jets, you could say. Question marks about New Orleans still. Detroit. I honestly am kind of middle of the road on Detroit and see how good they are. I'm not sure how they're going to really rebound. Last year was pretty disappointing for them. So, if we're going to have to go through the rankings there, I'd say that they've got a lot of tough teams on their schedule.
Yeah, so a couple of things I want to point out specifically about the schedule. They end the year with a very difficult slate. Like you mentioned, Buffalo in December at Buffalo, and then 3 straight games against NFC North competition, which is very difficult because not only is that division one of the best in football, and they probably should be again this year, they're going to have to contend with teams that they're likely going to be in a dogfight with for playoff positioning. And
Oh,
so
absolutely.
it's not just winning and losing those games, but what does winning and losing those games near the end of the season mean? I mean, in some cases, it could mean the difference between being one of the top 2 seeds in the NFC playoffs and having home field advantage and getting in there as like a 7 seed like they did last season. And that's a very, very different reality when you're looking to build upon the success of last season. And so you look at that, and I think that's one thing that definitely plays as a disadvantage for them. The other thing that I would say is when you look at November, they have, well, it's end of October to November. They have a 2026 Super Bowl uh, tour, if you will. They welcome New England October 22nd, and then their next game is at Seattle. So those are two games right there that are going to be tough in the middle of the season. And I think you just look at those 6 games right there that we just talked about, which are all second half of the season. While Chicago might get off to a good start, they're going to have to probably stay healthy to avoid a situation where a difficult schedule puts them into a position where they're just fighting to get into the playoffs at all. I could very well see a situation where Chicago makes people think early in the year that they're headed for great things. And then as the season goes along, things start to become a lot tougher, and they could have people jumping off the bandwagon just as quickly as they jumped on it.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, that their division is no joke. It feels like any time of the year, even if it is top heavy at times. I just, I don't think Minnesota is as bad as they were last year, unless JJ McCarthy's their starting quarterback, which I don't think he's an NFL quarterback. So
Kyler
that's
Murray probably, right?
Kyler Murray probably, but I think they said that there would be a quarterback battle there. But you know, does Kyler Murray really have it? Probably maybe better than JJ is, but um, no, I like you said, there if they are in a fight for their division or for a wild card spot, and they're sitting at 6-6 or something like that, and they're running into week 11, 12, they've got it. It's no joke. It's a gauntlet. You've got to end with Green Bay, Detroit at home, and then Minnesota there at Minnesota. So I really don't think to your point is if you're looking to build off that season and you're hoping for an easy way to the path to the playoffs, they don't have it. if things hold up like they were last year, but it's going to be extremely key, for Caleb Williams' development. See how he goes on, early on. Who is he facing against? How good are the defenses he's playing? Is he going to get eaten alive by some of these guys early? They've had some changes to their offensive line, so keeping Caleb Williams upright is going to be their main goal, and it has to be. So, regardless of who they're playing, you got to protect the quarterback, and I think that's something they could always improve on.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a believer in Chicago as a team. I think roster makeup, they have the ability to improve upon what they built last year. I really like Ben Johnson. I think that Caleb Williams is good enough. I'm not sure he's one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league, but he's good enough, especially with a guy like Johnson and the creativity that they can build offensively to get the job done there. But a lot of it is going to come down to that second half of the season. And you've got 2 things. You don't know the schedule, and you don't know what the injury situation is going to look like. So that one will be very interesting to keep an eye on, and I'm sure that we'll be hearing about it quite a bit, given that it is the Bears. But let's shift to maybe a very different scenario, and not in terms of the strength of schedule, because this team actually came in at number 3 as the third hardest schedule, but they are almost unanimously being named as the weakest team in the NFL this year. It makes me ask the question, are we already going to anoint these guys the benefactors of the Arch Manning sweepstakes? And that's the Arizona Cardinals. Give me your thoughts on what you think about this schedule, which is very tough, as I mentioned, number 3 overall in terms of what their opponents did last year. But they also have to go and play the entire AFC West, which I think you look at that division and it's 3 teams that should be legitimate playoff contenders, and then a team in Las Vegas that's going to have a lot of hope with Fernando Mendoza. So give me your thoughts on Arizona. Do you think it's too early to start talking about them? Even, I know tanking is not a word in the NFL, but this is going to be a bad team.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. This team is tanking. I mean, giving up on Kyler Murray is what it is. I don't think Kyler is necessarily like one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, but he has yet to prove to me that he really deserved the hype that he got. It sounds like he'd rather be playing Call of Duty than playing football, which I think a lot of people would prefer that, but you don't get paid millions of dollars to play Call of Duty. So, anyways, they've got to go through Kansas City, which like had a bad year for them, for their standards for sure last year. Do I think that they hold the same threat that they did? I don't know. It's hard to bet against Andy Reid, Pat Mahomes, and that defense of theirs, Chris Jones, everyone over there. And then Denver with a Bo Nix completely restructured foot. People are saying it was more serious than it appeared. So it's kind of I'm very intrigued to watch the Broncos this year. Talking about the AFC West, and then Seattle is just going to be Seattle when they play them on their regular schedule. But it's kind of one of those situations where you feel like the poor get poorer because if these teams perform like they did last season, and that holds up, they're in trouble because I don't think their roster really has much to offer. I like their draft. I like Jeremiah Love is a great running. I think he's going to have a really great career. But the quarterback room is Gardner Minshew and Jacoby Brissett, both extremely capable backup quarterbacks. And beyond that, they've got weapons offensively. I'm not saying they don't, and they've definitely built an offensive line a little bit better than it was with Paris Johnson. And this year, I believe they drafted Chase Bisonis in the second round. So I really don't. I think Arizona might be one of those teams where I don't think their strength of schedule is going to matter as much. I just don't think they're a very good team. So that's kind of where I stand with them.
Yeah. I mean, to me, Arizona feels like a team where we saw the blueprint last year of what's going to happen to them. And it was also out in the desert with Vegas, good rookie running back, but not a lot of running room because you don't have a quarterback that anybody really trusts. You've got a lot of holes you still got to fix. And my question is with Arizona, if they do get off to a poor start, like most people would expect, and they're, kind of positioning themselves for one of those top picks, if not the top pick, what player starts to get angry, right? Because if you're following the blueprint from last year, you're going to look at it and you're going to say, okay, well, the Raiders eventually had Max Crosby start to get a little bit vocal about wanting to get out of there. And what
right
is well, yeah, I mean, what is Arizona going to face if this happens where they're as bad as everybody predicted?
Right. Yeah, I mean, you'll see star players ask out. It's no different in the NFL than it is for a lot of these other leagues. You're just going to see people chime in. I hate to admit this, but like when people talk about that Bill Simmons list on the Ringer about how the most irrelevant franchise or something like that, I don't necessarily forget that the Cardinals exist, but if I were to say a team that is never on my radar and I never really watch their games because they're on the West Coast, they're not super good. If it weren't for like Larry Fitzgerald, I'd probably forget that the Cardinals exist. Because it's just they're not, unless they're on your schedule, they're not playing prime time. You're not really circling them as someone to watch on Sunday unless you've got nothing else going on.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I think as you get near the end of the season, the only reason that people will even recognize the Cardinals is because they might be so bad that everybody's already talking about who they're going to draft for next year.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, tank for Arch or whatever they want to call it, or tank for, it's going to be the theme. And, I think people are quick to judge and people are quick to label like Marvin Harrison a bust or, you know what I mean? But I don't think he's necessarily a bust. But you'll start to see players that if they do start to perform, they are going to want out, as you said. So, as you said, it is going to be a watch for a tank. It's not going to be a watch because they're going to surprise people like Carolina did. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to be Marvin Harrison who's going to get upset because in his case, if they are as bad as we're saying they're going to be, and they're almost surely going to go and get a quarterback in Harrison's position, he can kind of look at it like, well, it can't get any worse and it's almost sure to get better. And in his case, it's going to get better to the extent that he's going to have somebody who maybe can throw to him for a change at the
Right.
NFL level. But yeah, I mean, I think Crosby was the good example last year because he was doing everything he could defensively, and it just, wasn't really amounting to much on the other side of the ball. But yeah, Arizona probably getting more airtime right now than they're going to get for the rest of the season.
Let's move on. I'm tired of talking about the Cardinals.
Hey, we will. We'll move on. In fact, let's move on to one that I know some listeners are going to be interested about. They've got a difficult strength of schedule, which is why I put them on the talking point list for this episode, in addition to knowing a few people who are fans of this team. The strength of schedule is one of the reasons why I am not so sure they're going to be able to replicate the success. They've got to face the entire NFC North, which we've already talked about is going to be one of the best in football. But in addition, there's going to be the target on their back for being the runner-up in last season's campaign, and that is the New England Patriots. So taking a look at their schedule and what they have on the list, obviously being out of the AFC East, they've got to face Buffalo twice a year, and facing the Jets and the Dolphins may not seem difficult, but those teams get to prepare for you twice, so those won't be as easy of games as they might be for other teams. What are your thoughts on New England? Are they going to be able to run it back? There is obviously the comparison that you make for this year's schedule versus last year's schedule, which was consequently one of the easiest in the NFL.
I think this is the only podcast mentioning the New England Patriots, and your line is not about Mike Vrabel and his personal affairs. So congratulations on that.
We like to keep it professional here at Conversations.
Maybe someone should let the mic, but neither here nor there. New England is interesting. I had no, I remember looking at last year going to the playoffs. I didn't think they would even make it past the second round, and I was wrong. They've quickly recovered into being one of the standout franchises again after the Belichick Brady years. Undoubtedly one of the best run organizations, regardless behind who's behind there. But the schedule specifically, love to see playing Seattle right off the bat. The Super Bowl matchup rematch is always fun. But to your point, playing against the NFC North there, Chicago, another playoff team. Hard to see exactly how they're going to fare, but this could be one. This could be a fun game circled on the schedule. That one's being played on a Thursday night too, so you'll have Kirk and Al Michaels on the call there. I think it's deserved. Obviously, you want to give your best teams the hardest schedules, but I really don't know what to make of them this year, because I was wrong about them last year. I don't know. I really can't tell whatever happens with Mike. I don't think he's going to get fired, but it just feels like a big question mark for them this year. I really don't know how they're. I still could see them making the playoffs, but I don't see them being Super Bowl contenders.
Yeah, it felt last year like they got there early, and I think that's important to note when you consider this season, because this season, after the type of year that they had last year, and let's say they didn't even make it to the Super Bowl, let's just say they made it to the playoffs. I think a lot of people then would have had high expectations for this season and would have said, okay, well, if they can do some things in the offseason, like shore up some of the challenges they had on the offensive line and get a cornerback, which they did get, that they would be a team that would be dangerous and could make a run in the playoffs. But because they made it so far last year, I wonder whether or not the expectations now are too high. Like, it's almost the expectation.
It's New England. It's always too high. They expected the Super Bowl even after Brady left. Like, come on. It's always going to be at that level for them.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying from a local standpoint, but I'm talking national. I
Mm,
feel like national now, people have gotten on the New England bandwagon because of what happened. And I feel like you just have to pump the brakes a little bit because what they were able to do was in large part thanks to a favorable schedule. And then frankly speaking, and I'm okay with saying this and having this on record, they probably would not have won that game against Denver if Bo Nix was healthy.
probably
Just
not. I mean, that's a good point. That their strength is going to be, relying on those leaders that they have. They have a good defense. Their receiving room is just god awful. Their key signing this year was Romeo Dobbs, however you prefer to say it. I like Ramondre Stevenson, Travion. I'm an Ohio State guy, so obviously I think frankly he was underutilized last year a little bit, but I I really don't know what to make of them. They also signed Elijah Vera Tucker, so they've improved their offensive line. People, had a lot of fun with Will Campbell and his little T-Rex arms, uh, and his ability or lack of ability, was kind of taken advantage of in the Super Bowl. But come on, that wasn't all his fault. So, yeah, I don't know. After the offseason shakes out and whatever happens with Mike Vrabel, I really don't think he's going to get fired or anything crazy like that. But it kind of seems like the story that just won't go away. So I think they've got some things to worry about outside of their schedule at this very moment.
certainly. Although I will say, if there's any franchise that can overcome something like this because of the culture that they've built there, I feel like this would be the one,
It's New
or
England. Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
a small handful of them that could handle this. It's a weird thing to say because if something like this is happening, maybe the culture is all, a show to begin with. But I actually believe that it is there and that this is just an unusual situation that you just don't see every day. So, yeah, I would agree with you that some of the off the field noise is definitely going to have an impact when it comes to the focus heading into the season. But, when these guys finally put the pads on and they start being, actual plays being made. I do think that it's ultimately going to have something to do with, were they actually as good as it seemed like they were last year, or was this a situation where they got kind of lucky? And I'm speaking also from the perspective of somebody who is a fan of a team that had a similar situation 2 years ago, where they had to come up and quite rapidly and quite unexpectedly, and then they had a difficult schedule handed to them the next season. And that combined with a lot of injuries and maybe some regression on the defensive side made it very difficult for the Commanders, who I'm referring to replicate that success after they had a really good season the year prior.
Yeah, your commies have some other issues to deal with, and they're, I guess, not too much unlike the Patriots with their quarterback situation. Drake May had a really great year, but with Washington, it's is Jade McDaniels really the answer, or can he stay healthy? Are the questions for them. So, I think Drake May is a really good quarterback, and I think he'll probably only get better as time goes on. But they need to surround him with the right players in order for it to come to fruition.
Yeah, I think that's really the key. I don't really have a lot of concerns with Drake May and his ability to continue to develop. I have concerns with, is the offensive line going to develop the way they want it to? And frankly speaking, were they as good as their season last year would have suggested? So we'll have to see. Basically, what I'm saying is I'm a little bit of a doubter of what type of season they had last season, and they're going to have to prove me wrong with a relatively difficult schedule this year. But if there is a team that can do it, New England has proven time and again they are the franchise to get through that. They have proven to me, though, that just to go on a little bit of a tangent here, the front office is very capable. I was worried about that, and I made that known to some fans of the team that it was going to be an inflection point after they got rid of Bill Belichick, because if they were still having the same struggles after him leaving the building, you start to wonder whether or not it's the front office that really was preventing them from being successful after Tom Brady left. But it seems like they've gotten it together relatively quickly, which would suggest, as I had theorize that Bill Belichick might have been more of the problem there than not.
They proved you wrong that on that point at least. They made it there, so continuing that success is all they have left to prove.
Yep. All right. Well, shifting then to another team that's had a lot of historic success, but they have had some difficulties over the past couple of seasons, whether it be staying healthy or getting people to believe in what they're doing, particularly from an offensive standpoint. The San Francisco 49ers came into this list right in the middle. They're at number 18. So, in terms of strength of schedule, it would really be considered average. They do have to face the AFC West, similar to their division mate Arizona, but I think that they have the ability to fare much better in those contests than the Cardinals do. My big question about San Francisco, and I think why it's worth bringing up in particular, is that they are going to be doing a first for the NFL, which is participating in 2 international games in the same season. They kick off the year with a really difficult trip to Australia to face the Rams, which is going to be a difficult game in itself, but obviously it's across the world for them. And then later on in the season, they travel to Mexico City and play a game there. So let's talk, before we talk about San Francisco in general, about the international game schedule, which I'm starting to see some rumblings that the NFL is going to want to further flex their muscle when it comes to what they're capable of doing there. I've heard rumblings that they might try to advance from 9 games, which is the max that they're allowed to under the current broadcast schedule, to a full 16-game international schedule, which would have effectively ensured that every team in the league could play at least 1 game overseas. And then the other thing that they're looking at doing, at least from what I have seen on the internet, is that they're looking to try to whittle the number of games down that teams can protect. So where that's important is a team that wants to maximize its ability, I would imagine for revenue purposes, to play, division rivals, for example, at home. Those abilities for the individual teams might eventually get taken away. So let's start with the first question. Playing 2 international games in a season, is that fair for a team? Or is
it's it's funny because it's a little different for them. I mean, like they're going to Australia, for God's sakes. Like, that's no joke. I get it's to start the season, but that's going to be extremely difficult, I think, to do that. And then, like you said, having 2, Mexico City isn't that long of a flight, about a 4-hour flight to Mexico City. I don't think they should have probably 2 international games on one team's schedule, if at all possible, just because of the wear it takes on people. That much travel is extremely difficult, especially when you've got some of these teams are already traveling far enough as it is. I don't know. I kind of looking at their schedule, looking at their follow-up games. Right after they play the Rams, they play at home versus Miami, which not super hard there. But when you look at the game they play against Minnesota and Mexico City, they have to play against Seattle. It is at home, but then you're playing against the reigning Super Bowl champs after you just went to Mexico City. So I would prefer let's be real, they're going to expand as many games as they want. The NFL controls the narrative here. They can do whatever they please. So I truly think that they're going to expand to 16 games or however many they want. And the broadcast, corporations will just have to deal with it. The NFL rules, they're king in terms of viewership. They're just going to get what they want, but I just think it makes far more sense to keep 1 international game per team per year, if that's even a possibility.
Yeah. One important clarification to make, because I misspoke to an extent. San Francisco is not the first team to ever play two international games in the same season, but they
Sure.
are the first team to play two international games that aren't back to back. Minnesota was the first team to do it last season, but they played both of their games in back to back weeks, also on the same continent in Europe. This is going to be a little bit different for San Francisco. And that trip, which I've done from the States to Australia, is no small feat. And you're asking elite athletes to prepare themselves both before and after that trip. And then when they're over there, obviously they're doing something a little different than I was doing on my honeymoon. So it is a big ask. I can understand why a guy like John Middlecoff would go onto his podcast and use expletives to explain how difficult it is, because it's not easy. And I just wonder whether or not they're going to continue doing something like this, where they give a team the unfortunate task of having to go overseas twice or go to a different country twice, or if they're going to start to structure this a little bit differently in terms of having teams all participate rather than focusing on certain teams to do the leap, if you will. One last question I'll ask on the international aspect. Do you think it's ever possible that the NFL would consider putting a game international, or putting the Super Bowl internationally?
I at this point I wouldn't be surprised by anything. I think it's that's a symbol of American culture is the Super Bowl, but money talks, and getting more international viewers is very clearly on Goodell's mind, and it's an agenda that they have and have had for a number of years. Them talking about putting permanent teams in places like London and Mexico City, and stuff like that. I would not be shocked if they put it somewhere else, which is going to just cause all sorts of fun discussions around the country. But I don't think I necessarily would want that to happen. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to any Super Bowls anytime soon, because my team is the Browns. So I'll not be viewing them. Maybe before I die, but I don't know about the likelihood of that happening either.
Well, that's a good segue. I agree with you. I think at some point they would absolutely consider an international Super Bowl, because in the end, it's a place to be seen. And if they can make it work from a broadcast perspective, which I'm sure they can, especially if they put it somewhere in Europe where the time difference is about 6 hours at that time of year, they could certainly start the Super Bowl late local time, but have an early afternoon start on the U.S. time zones. But shifting to your team, the Browns, I put them on there mostly because you were going to guest spot today, but also because they, according to the strength of schedule list, are actually the easiest schedule in the NFL this year. But to your point, it is the Browns. So does that make any difference? They face the NFC South, which is, in my opinion, the weakest division in the NFL, both last year and I think moving forward they will be. And they get the AFC North, which I think the AFC North is a little bit unfortunate when you consider a strength of schedule metric in this format, because the teams typically all finish very close to each other, and there's a lot of losses that are built up amongst those four teams. So it's kind of the self-fulfilling prophecy. If you are in the AFC North, you might have a record that is pretty close to 500, which puts you in a certain position when you consider next season's strength based on that metric.
Certainly. I mean, I've always been, the past few years, maybe not so much, but I've always been a proponent that the AFC North is the best, or one of the hardest divisions to play in. So that's left the Browns, unfortunately, at the bottom of the barrel, because they're playing against some of the harder competition every single season, twice a year. Pittsburgh, you never know what you're going to get out of them. They re-signed Aaron Rodgers. I'm sure he'll continue to be. I don't think he's going to make them any better than they were last year, but they'll probably be just as good as they were. I would probably look for Baltimore to have a bounce back year. Clearly, they've had a lot of changes, so that could be wrong. But they still have Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews, and a really good defense to boot. And Cincinnati, if Joe Burrow rebounds and stays healthy, Cincinnati, it's always about the health and how good their defense is, which I know they addressed. But the Browns, it's just I have no faith in them. I just don't. They're still talking about playing Deshaun Watson as their starting quarterback, and it's just give up already and move on. And I would just want to see whether I'm not a huge Shooter doubter, I'm a big Shooter hater or believer, but I move on. Let's see what we can do. They did a huge thing in addressing their offensive line. They made a lot of trades, free agent signings, and somehow all of the pundits seem to believe they had the best or one of the best drafts. The Browns seem to be great at winning the offseason as every year, and then just completely crapping the bed when it comes to actually playing. So, we'll see how it all shakes out. I really, it is, I guess, not the most difficult when you're looking at that division. They're playing New Orleans, Houston, Atlanta, just to name a few of those teams. See if Stefanski can get a little bit of a revenge game going on there in December. It would be funny if the Browns did kind of put themselves into a potential wild card spot or competing for one, and then they, get all the way to week 14 and then have to play the guy that they just let go because they thought he was the issue. So we'll find out. I just can't have confidence in this team until I actually see them do it on the field. So Browns fans love to argue about stuff on paper because it's the most fun to talk about hypotheticals when your team is consistently one of the worst in the league.
See, that's why I thought you would have more to say about this. I figured, if anything, the hope of having an easy schedule and having the opportunity to play some teams that, at least on paper, you would match up with more favorably than some other divisions would give you a little bit of reason to talk positively. But
nope.
You sound more jaded than I've seen.
Yeah, there's just no. I mean, there's just too many question marks on the team. You have no idea how good the quarterback is going to be. Offensive line is completely brand new. The receivers are led by a guy in Jerry Jeudy, who I don't think is the number one receiver. Probably one of the, they drafted a few guys, Casey Concepcion and Denzel Boston, I think are going to be a boost to them for sure. But Myles Garrett's all alone on that defense. He's got Denzel Ward, who's always hurt. Carson Schlesinger had a fantastic season as a rookie, but the defense really has never been a question for them. We'll see if losing Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator really, has any say in what happens. I like the draft, but we're just gonna have to see. I guess you could call me jaded or realistic. I'd say they're one and the same in this case.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they're one and the same at this point. For Browns fans, they typically are not, but you're not talking like a Browns fan, so
I'm not your typical Browns fan. At least I don't think so.
You're really bad for radio in terms of Browns talk.
You wanted me to give you the Cleveland either the sky is falling or the everything is we're Super Bowl bound. I know. I'm no plain dealer writer, so you can't get either one of those reactions out of me.
No, in fact, actually, we like to take this approach. This is why you're on Conversations and you're not on one of Cleveland Sports Talk Radio or writing for the Plain Dealer.
Fair enough. I don't know. I'd love to be positive, but the most positive. We talked about the schedule release. I loved the Street Fighter video that they did. I don't know if you caught that one, Kyle, but I enjoyed that. Like I said, I feel like a number of these releases were geared towards millennials specifically.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Actually, I saw a couple of them, and this is a new trend. I've seen this not just with the schedule release, but also just in general on social media, is they'll have two sides, and one will say, this is written by our millennial social media coordinator, and then the other side is written by the Gen Z coordinator, and they're just using all the buzzwords from the Gen Z side. But yeah, I think for me, the favorite was actually Chicago's. They had Roma Dunze come on and be Bob Ross and paint the picture of the schedule.
Yeah.
Lots of happy tigers in that video. But
Fantastic.
yeah, actually, at first I was going to take the approach that I felt like it was a little bit overdone at this point, but they have been able to find ways to make it interesting. And quite frankly, with something like a schedule release that can be pretty dry otherwise, I do think that the novelty of this has not yet worn off, and it is something to get people talking about something that would otherwise probably fall under the radar if they didn't try to make it something worth talking about.
Before we shift, I'm sorry, I have to throw your guy Kirk under the bus. I know he's no longer hasn't been a commander for a long time, but that one from the Raiders, the video from the Raiders with Fernando Mendoza and Kirk Cousins was just awful. And I know they were trying to go for a Step Bros parody thing and play on how dorky Kirk is, and not to throw Fernando under the bus, but he maybe didn't sell it. I just it was just like I was confused the whole time. There was nothing about it that I didn't find it funny whatsoever. I'm sorry.
You know what I think the problem is with what they tried to do is that Kirk, in his very nature, is a dork, and that gets played out, and people kind of see that in Quarterback, the Netflix show. And
really bad in that.
It's genuine though. It's not that it's bad. It's not that he's acting.
It's who he is, 100%.
It's who he is. With Fernando Mendoza, I don't think that he's actually a dork. He's just a very prepared. He has a script. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I don't think there's a problem with that. If that's how you feel like you can be best prepared to do your job, which is to go be an NFL quarterback,
right.
And that includes what you're going to do with the media. But I don't think that he's actually a dork. I think Fernando Mendoza is just a guy who rehearses everything he says before he actually has a mic in front of him.
Right. I think that this showcased what you're saying exactly. It's just read the script and that's what it is. And I'm not saying he didn't give it his all or try, because I think he did, but I think him being paired with Kirk just kind of made it so, like, emphasized his inability to to just be a charismatic human being.
Right. And I think that is in essence its problem, is that they said, well, hey, you guys are both dorks. Let's put you both together and you can be stepbrothers. And the reality is that works for Kirk Cousins because that is who he is. But Fernando Mendoza is a different guy, and he can read you the lines, but it's not going to seem authentic. Yeah. Him reading the lines is what is authentic about him, not the fact that he's a dork. At least that's my take on it. So,
yeah. I mean, you can't. Not everyone can have Jameis Winston writing out their schedule. So, there's that charisma is just not there for everybody.
Yep, and that actually works really well where he's at too.
Oh yeah.
So I saw that one, and I also enjoyed that one.
Winston Van Gogh, perfect.
Yes. So yeah, shifting gears then from one Cleveland opportunity to another. There's the lead that I'm not so burying. It feels like this is a topic that comes up every year as far as LeBron James is concerned, where he's going to be playing basketball next season, if at all. That's starting to gain a lot of steam now that the Lakers are out of the playoffs. I feel like it would have gained even more steam if the Cavs had not closed out the series with Detroit with a victory.
What happened then? What was that again? Can you say it one more time?
The Cavs closed out the series against the Pistons with a victory.
That's right. And what was in the score? About 30 point was the margin of victory there? That's pretty good, right?
That's right. It was not a game for almost the entirety of the second half. So very boring to watch.
No, that was probably one of my favorite games in the playoffs so far.
Yeah, as a fan. But I think the NBA probably hated it.
I don't care. It was, I've sat on the other side of that so many times that I was thrilled that I was just kept waiting for Detroit to make a run, and they just never did. And it was very surprising because they looked unprepared for that game. Completely different tail of the tape versus Game 6, obviously. So I enjoyed every second of it. And, to your point, it's impossible for LeBron to not be in the news. I feel like things happen. He's one of those people where things happen or stories come out about him, and it's never even on his mind. Clearly he's been thinking about where he wants to play next year. I don't think he's going to retire. I could really at this point see it going 50-50. I don't think he's going to play anywhere else besides LA or Cleveland. If he just re-signed in LA and called it a day, I wouldn't be shocked at all. And I don't even know if this season for the Cavs has any bearing on his decision. But there are reports recently that James Harden is probably going to re-sign in Cleveland, whether they get to the finals, win the finals, whatever the case may be. That Harden's going to be back. So I think Harden is one of those people that LeBron hasn't played with. And obviously Donovan Mitchell is there, and it's going to be an extremely interesting offseason for the Cavs. They'll be in the news no matter what, because until LeBron signs the contract with wherever he's going, him and Cleveland are always going to be linked, and I'm fine with that. I'd certainly welcome him back regardless of what it is. I know there's a bunch of financials that'll need to happen for that to work, but I think it'd be a great ending to his career, and there's no reason any Cavs fan wouldn't want him back.
Yeah, I don't think the Cavs fans are the real question mark here. I think it would be unanimously accepted if he decided to come back, even if it was in a very different role than what he played the last time he was in Cleveland. Obviously, that would have to be the case. I mean, this is no longer his team. It wouldn't be his team if he came back. He's in a situation right now in New York or in Los Angeles where it's not his team. So I don't think that there would be any surprise there, and that would be one of my question marks if I didn't know anything else was, can the king go back to his kingdom and not be the king anymore? I think he's willing to accept that. My real question when it comes to whether or not he's going to decide to go back to Cleveland or just stay in Los Angeles is, like you said, there's financial things to figure out. One of the things that I wanted to bring up with this conversation is the fact that he's an unrestricted free agent for the first time since 2018. And somebody, I can't remember who it was that I was listening to last week, mentioned that it is extremely likely that LeBron is going to have to take a pay cut for the first time in his career. And it sounds odd with all of the financial success that I'm sure he has had, and he's almost undoubtedly not, needing the money. But in terms of the optics of it, is that going to play into this at all? Because if it does, then I think that you might have the ability, if you're the Lakers, to have a leg up on every other team that's going to be making their best pitch to LeBron. And that's what we're hearing right now. Shams has said it, and Rich Paul said it too. A number of teams have already reached out to talk about the interest in LeBron joining them. But in the end, if he's going to have to take a pay cut, it feels like the team that has the direct line of communication to him right now, which are the Lakers, are going to be the team that has that leg up if it comes down to a financial decision.
Yeah, that's always going to be the case. He definitely would have to take a pay cut, I think, to play a lot of places, but Cleveland specifically, they just don't have the financials to make it work. I guess depending on who they trade or move around, that might be a difficult decision. If they were to win the finals, how can you say that we should break this team up? You can't go in there and be like, well, we need to trade Jared Allen or Donovan Mitchell or any of these other guys that we're paying a lot of money to. If you win the finals, what's your excuse? You can't do that. So it depends on the ego. And I think part of it, LeBron would secretly love throwing in people's faces that he took a pay cut. I really do. And I love LeBron, but he needs to be liked, it feels like. And that's kind of what kind of pushes my opinion to him going back to Cleveland makes a lot of sense, because he really enjoys being liked. And he really needs that perception of him, and he likes to act like he doesn't care, but I think it's very clear that he does.
He certainly at least pays attention to it because he's able to talk specifically about certain things in ways that you wouldn't be able to if it wasn't something that was important to you. So I'll agree with you there. Going back to maybe the ego comment that you briefly talked about, do you think that if the Cavs were to win the title this year, that that might actually hurt their chances of bringing somebody like LeBron in? Because again, from an optics perspective, you're going to have the internet trolls who are going to talk about LeBron, you know, championship hopping. They already do that. And then if you go and you join a team that just won the NBA title for your final season, even it being the Cavs, who he has every right to go back to because of his association with them, I feel like that would be something that would be pretty loud on the socials.
Yeah, to your point, it probably would. I hadn't necessarily thought of it that way. I think if it were any other team besides Cleveland, it would matter. Um, but I think because it's the Cavs, maybe he can kind of control the storyline from the point of this is where I would always end my career, regardless if they won, how successful they were the year before. But there's always going to be those trolls out there on the internet and whatever that are going to get in his head and say whatever they want. So, he's going to have to make his decision and then live with it, just like the rest of us.
Yeah. In fairness, I think that's and sorry to the Cavs fans, including yourself out there that are going to take offense to this, but I think that's an unlikely scenario because the Cavs winning the NBA title this year would be a pretty big shock, given the way that
Oh, no
things have
doubt.
been going on the Western Conference side. But you could also then say, okay, if they don't make it and they get pretty close, but they're not quite there, that's all the motivation I think then that you would need if you're LeBron and you want to try to do it this way to say, hey, I want to come in and I want to be the piece that helps put it together, the missing puzzle piece that can allow the Cavs to truly compete against, some of the heavy hitters that are going to be here for a long time coming out of the Western Conference.
Yeah.
Whereas, with Los Angeles, the reality is there's a lot of noise going on there. Is he going to take a pay cut? Does he like guys like Luka Doncic? Does he want to be a third wheel behind him and Austin Reeves and the like? There's so many things that are happening just within Los Angeles. And then you're not even getting to the fact that OKC and San Antonio are here to stay. I mean, they're not getting any worse. They're young. They have flexibility, and they're probably going to be in the same position that they're in this year for the foreseeable future, barring something unusual. So, coming out of the Western Conference is going to be incredibly difficult. Whereas with Cleveland, you kind of look at it and you say, yeah, the East has been, generally speaking, wide open.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the West has been dominating for years in terms of the talent there. OKC and San Antonio, I think, are actually the two best teams in the league, and they just happen to be playing in the semifinals. So I don't know if anyone's going to beat. I don't know if anyone in the East could beat either of those teams right now. I do think the Knicks are extremely talented, but then again, I just don't see them stacking up against either of those teams either. So they'll have to play the games obviously, but I don't think moving from the West to the East would be a bad thing for LeBron. He is going to have to be second, third fiddle no matter what team he goes to at this point in his career, which I think is no shame for someone that's 42 years old. He's doing things that no one's ever seen for someone that age. So I don't know. I could see him, drawing this out and making it a big thing and be like, oh, I might retire, I might do this, or I could see him just signing an extension with LA and just calling it a day. So,
yeah, I think either way, it's going to take some time. I think he has every right to be able to elongate the process because this is kind of uncharted territory when it comes to a player making this type of decision. And he already has done this in the past. But it to me isn't going to feel like it's him trying to draw out the situation. I think he's actually legitimately going to need it in order to make the call that's right for him and his family.
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, I think at this point he's not going to retire. That's my only thing I know. I feel like I'm certain about is he's not retiring.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree. I don't know why you would hang it up at this point in your career. It's not. Somebody compared the situation to, well, John Elway went out, at the peak of his powers, if you will. He still was competing and won a Super Bowl, but I thought it was a horrible comparison because number one, LeBron did not win the NBA title this year, and number two, John Elway was not at the peak of his powers. He was struggling, I think, to walk those last years in Denver, and LeBron is still a freak athlete and is doing things like you said at 41 years old in his 23rd NBA season, both unprecedented that people have not seen before. So this is not your run-of-the-mill situation where legend is looking for a way to have a soft landing. I think he's truly looking for a situation that makes sense for him.
Yeah, I just hope it's in Cleveland. That's just
right.
Selfishly,
right. Understood.
I think a lot of people would hope that, though. I'm sure there are plenty of Cavs haters out there at this point, but I think people would love to see that and see him fail, and then people would love to see it and see a storybook ending. So either way, all the attention will be on him as usual.
And maybe that sounds a little bit more disingenuous than it seems, because I think to some extent he deserves that attention.
No, he does.
So shifting to a topic that seems to be making the rounds in many Conversations episodes. We're not a uniform jersey podcast, but we do like to talk about them. There was if you're somebody who is a Central Ohio sports fan, a relatively large announcement last week related to Ohio State's football uniforms going into the upcoming college football season. And the Buckeyes have unveiled not one, not two, not three, but 4 new uniform combinations for the 2026 season. Not all of them are all that new. Actually, none of them are new. Technically, they're bringing back uniforms that have not been used in a while. But wanted to get your opinion on these, Zach, because I am not of the opinion that a team like Ohio State needs to have announcements like this. I feel like when you consider Ohio State football, they're like New York Yankees baseball or Los Angeles Lakers basketball. You recognize the teams with certain uniforms in certain colors, and you don't need to do these types of things to create buzz. But I'm curious about your thoughts because it seems generally positive, the feedback that has been received about these jerseys, specifically the ones that are bringing back simply the gray stripes on the sleeves.
Yeah, I think going back to the gray stripes is great. I mean, I really like them. I never really liked them switching to the black piping there. So I like the Buckeye stripe, as they're calling it, on the sleeves. I think that's a great look, and that should be permanent. I've always been a bigger fan of the away unis, not to be a hater on the Scarlets, but so I really like the quote unquote Sub-Zero uniform that they're doing, the all whites. I think they're really slick with the silver helmet. I think it looks fantastic. I really like the tunnel vision as well, the all black. I think, outside of the scarlet, the all scarlet and the tunnel vision, Scarlet Rush is what they're calling it. They're just kind of subtle changes. The sleeves are a subtle change that really only Ohio State fans probably would notice, or real big college football fans. And the Sub-Zero, they're really just changing the gray pants to white to match the top. So I think it's sharp. I think it looks great. And I think they're just subtle changes. So you're not, really going crazy against traditionalists. They're, those people are extremely loud and like, it should always be the same. But that doesn't sell jerseys, and it doesn't sell, viewership.
That's not what I sound like.
What? That wasn't imitating you specifically, but it could be if you want. I don't know. I think they look sharp. My least favorite is probably the Scarlet Rush. I don't like the all red, but it's a recruiting tactic. Let's not kid ourselves here. Like, that's something that recruits are looking for, especially these days. Uh, so whether you love it or hate it, it's going to be there to stay.
Yeah. Yeah, I generally agree with you. I don't have a huge problem with the subtle changes. In fact, going back to gray stripes, it's something that Ohio State hasn't done in 20 years. 2006 was the last time that they had those on a regular basis. I think is overall actually a return to some level of traditionalism, if you will. So that's actually a good thing. I also don't mind the all whites either. I think it's subtle enough where you, generally speaking, still get the Ohio State that you expect to see when you turn the television on. I don't like the all reds at all. I agree. I think those are the most garish of the uniforms that they have unveiled. I also think that to an extent, whether or not fans or recruits or anybody will tell you or not outright, the jersey sales, particularly for those, are going to reflect that. And of course, it's difficult to make that determination for the all reds because the truth is, if you're just buying the top, it's not really, you can't really tell.
True.
But in terms of the all reds, it to me, you're going to turn the television on and you're going to think it's a different team if you're not paying close enough attention. So
Agreed.
I don't like
I
that.
don't think that's for us. And as I like to say, is like that. Not everything is for you. I think that is probably very Gen Z or whatever, drawing attention to. That's kind of how I feel.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's fair. That's fair. All blacks, though, I think this is the most intriguing one. And the reason I say that is because I actually do think that it can look really sharp under the right conditions. And that's where I think that it's interesting that they're bringing this back, is that I have my doubts about whether or not the right conditions will present itself for these uniforms. And you may know where I'm going with this one already, Zach. The all blacks, in my opinion, make the most sense under the lights in Ohio Stadium. And I
Yeah.
don't know where they're going to wear these, where it's not a, generally speaking, throwaway game during the regular season because of the big noon aspect. I mean, the biggest games of the season now on Ohio State's schedule are overwhelmingly being played at noon. And so these uniforms are going to be left out in the sun, if you will, unless they're going to play them, in some middle of October game where it's on Peacock and the only people watching are Ohio State fans.
Yeah. I'm just so tired of the big noon kickoffs. I can't stand them anymore at this point. And I like Gus Johnson, I like Joel Klatt, but I can't sit there and watch them call every single one of our games at noon. I just can't do it anymore. It's only been one season of it, and I hated it. You're absolutely right. They've got to wear those at a night game, something that's important. At the very least, it's got to be a Big Ten opponent, for those uniforms. Because otherwise, yeah, gonna watch them play against nobody at noon wearing these sick uniforms, and the stadium might not even be full, and that's not the point.
Yeah. No, I mean, looking at their schedule, I see 3 potential games that they could use these uniforms for. And I think one of them that would be exciting is the least likely of these 3 games. I'm looking at October 10th, home against Maryland. I'm looking at November 7th, home against Oregon, which would be the big hitter.
Mm-hmm.
And then the following weekend against Northwestern. And I think those would be the 3 most likely games that they decide to make a night game. Just the rest of the schedule, they're either on the road or they're in games that are in no way going to be considered for a night game. I don't see Illinois being a night game. Obviously, the Michigan game's not going to be a night game.
Right.
And then the early season games, it doesn't really make sense. I don't know why you would throw the All Blacks out for Ball State or Kent State.
Watch them do it against Kent State. I mean, come on. The one that makes the most sense is Oregon, obviously. The team that has no tradition with their uniforms, and they have 1,000 different combinations every season. It would make sense against them, but if they play that game at noon, there should be a riot.
Well, I would think there would be a riot in Eugene because a noon game
true.
at Ohio Stadium is a 9 a.m. start for Oregon.
Awful. Yeah, we can't have that. We just can't. Something needs to be done about this whole Big Noon kickoff thing, and that's unfortunately a bigger discussion than this. But I I would, a perfect game would have been against USC as well at night because, they've played USC on the road and at home. I remember when we were in high school. Obviously, that one's on the road though, so you're probably not gonna put one of your awesome black or Scarlet Rush uniforms on for an away game. At least I wouldn't think.
Probably not Scarlet Rush against a team who is also predominantly red either, but
you never know.
Yeah, we'll have to table that discussion though about Big Noon because I'm not on the same page as you in terms of hating it, but you're correct. That is a conversation for a different day and probably a conversation for multiple people because I feel like I'm in the minority in terms of my opinion on Big Noon kickoff as a whole.
No, just keep it to yourself then.
We're going to keep it to ourselves for now. Listeners, keep tuning in. That'll be a conversation certainly for a different podcast, but we are going to wrap things up here for the episode as we're trending towards an hour and 20. I do want to close the discussion though, Zach, with a question that I typically ask people as we close out. What is on your mind going into the weekend, sports related? And I think this is a particularly interesting question given that we're heading into a holiday weekend with Memorial Day on the horizon. It's a huge weekend for sports. There's a ton going on. Just a few that come to mind for me. The greatest day in racing. So with the Indy 500 in the middle of the day, and then the Coke 600 with NASCAR rounding out the day. That's on Sunday. And then throughout the weekend, European soccer is going to be doing a lot of answering of questions in terms of who gets promoted, who gets relegated from the various divisions over across the pond. NCAA men's Division I lacrosse has their Final Four over the weekend. Saturday is the Final Four games, and then they finish off the season with a championship game on Monday afternoon. The French Open will be in full swing in tennis, so that'll be third, fourth round, I believe, by the time we roll around to the weekend. And then, of course, the NBA and the NHL playoffs roll on, and there is one game for both leagues every day from Friday through Monday this coming weekend. So how do you break it all down, Zach? How do you manage to have a little bit of time for sports viewing while everything else is going on as far as the holidays are concerned? I know last weekend, I think you guys were up at the lake house. So are you going to even get any time to watch sports this weekend, or is it going to be one you're going to have to store away for later?
Yeah, I mean, I no offense to you and racing and European soccer fans or men's lacrosse, I will not be watching any of those things. I do not care for racing one bit. I just don't find it interesting. But there are, to your point, it is a great sports weekend. You've got, the NBA playoffs. I'm a Cavs fan. I will be tuned in for those games, no doubt. And then in the NHL playoffs, where, in my opinion, the best playoffs there is in sports. So you've got, the Eastern Conference wrapping up right now. Canadians Sabres are playing tonight, Game 7. To see who goes on to the Eastern Conference Finals. And then you've got the Golden Knights and the Abs in Colorado starting their series for the Western Conference on Wednesday and then continuing through the weekend. So I'm going to be tuned into those, some of the major ones. Something that, I do think the NHL playoffs are the best. And then when it comes to the NBA finals, I obviously have a rooting interest there. So that will be my main interest as we move into this tremendous sports weekend.
All right. Well, last question then for you, specific to Memorial Day weekend, underrated or properly rated weekend as far as sports are concerned throughout the calendar year?
I would say probably properly rated. I'll give it that.
Properly rated. Okay. Well, I know for the listeners who have been with us for a while, we posed the question way back about what your favorite weekend in sports was. So we won't do that again, but let us know your thoughts on the strength of schedule conversation that we had. Do you think it's a bunch of blown smoke, or do you think there's something to it in terms of determining how teams will do this season? That'll be the interaction for the week. But Zach, very much appreciate you joining the podcast. We finally got a chance to do this. Hopefully you had a good time, and hopefully the listeners enjoyed hearing us gab for an hour and 20 minutes.
I'll be back, as your announcer voice would like to say.
Absolutely. Well, you've got an open invitation to be back. So fans, hopefully you enjoyed the episode. Enjoy the packed sports weekend ahead, including the racing and soccer that Zach is not going to be paying any attention to. I certainly will be. But until that occurs and until the next episode, take it easy, Shuckers.